Hi, thank you for joining me on my next project. In my family room I have a coffered ceiling and I'm going to be applying some decorative molding to give it a waffle ceiling look. It's not the exact same as a waffle ceiling, but it'll give you that idea that it's waffled. Just going to include a 360 of my ceiling in the family room. So as you can see here, it's a little bit different on this side. The ceiling actually doesn't butt up against the wall, but the other ceiling of the eating area and kitchen. So what I started doing is marking the location of the roof trusses. They're 2 feet on centers, and I've used a stud finder as well. And the fact that I had some pictures when I was building a house showing the location of the studs in reference to the pot lights. So as you can see, hopefully it comes through on the camera. I started marking the location of the studs. I'm going to use that to screw the molding into the studs, and also going to be applying glue to the back of the molding, and also using some finishing nails to apply it. So the tools I need to accomplish this is a compressor, air hose, finish nailer, which is that blue gun, a regular standard drill to pre-drill the molding so I don't crack it. I've also got an impact drill to help put the screws in. Your hammer, got some LePage glue. My finishing nails, I'm using 2.5 inch. Tape measure and some deck screws. So this is the molding that I'm going to be applying. Basically it's 5/8 MDF board. I had purchased it at Home Depot. It comes in 4x8 sheets, and I had Home Depot rip it for me, 6 inches wide, so you get approximately 8 boards per sheet, and it's definitely worth having them do it. The last project I did, I actually tried ripping it myself, and it's quite challenging if you don't have the proper tools and facility for doing it, especially trying to get it to go straight. These boards are perfectly straight. Now they're white because I actually pre-primed them. Save me some time. That way I don't have to be up on a ladder or scaffold to do the work. This is the primer that I've been using. A buddy of mine gave it to me. He's a painter, and he uses strictly Benjamin Moore paints. So he's given me a gallon of this to try out. It's Benjamin Moore Super Spec. I've run out of the Benjamin Moore primer I was using, so I bought Sherwin-Williams. It's a multi-purpose primer. The difference I find between this primer and the Benjamin Moore is the Benjamin Moore seemed to splatter a little bit more, so there's a little bit more splattering going on as I was applying, and seemed to be a lot thicker and just a little messier to apply than the Sherwin-Williams. Coverage wise, it's the same, and both seem to cover very well on the unprimed MDF board. So what I started doing actually is I actually mounted 3 boards, and then I didn't actually glue them on or nail them in. I just temporarily screwed them in. Made sure they all aligned across the wall or the ceiling, and I made a horizontal line to follow when I actually proceed to glue the boards and screw and nail them in. That way I'm not fiddling when I'm up there. And that also guarantees that one board butts up against the other board correctly and there's no step. One thing I want to point out is the walls are never 100%. So you got to do the best you can in order to get it to align. And I'm going to have the same challenge on the ceiling, where the flat ceiling meets with the slanted ceiling. It's never a perfect match. Any gaps can be filled by wood filler, DAP, whatever. Just getting ready to install the molding. So I've got myself a brand new number 2 bit for my impact drill to drive in the screws. I'm going to load up my Campbell and Housefield finish nailer. with some 2.5-inch 16 gauge nails. This is what they come in strips, and this particular nailer, it's just got the lever on the side. Kind of pull it back, it locks into place, and you just drop the finished nails. Okay, so drop them in, push on this button here to close it. So that's all ready to go. I'm going to plug in my air compressor, have it charge up, and I'm going to proceed to install the first piece of molding. I'm going to put in a few drops of compressor oil into my nailer, and I'm going to use a syringe to do that. That just prevents the nailer from rusting on the inside, because the compressor may have always generates some water, and I don't want that water getting into your air tools and damaging it. So by putting some oil in it, keeps it nice and lubricated and prevents it from rusting internally. You just need to apply a couple of drops into the tool. I'll do about 5, and that's about it. So I'm about to apply the first board. Just going to apply some glue to the board. I've got the first board mounted just with 2 screws. As you can see, some of the glue has dripped onto the wall, so I'm just going to clean that up. And then I'm going to proceed to nail a couple of finishing nails in there just to secure it tightly. So clean up any glue stains and then go back and finish nailing it. Just going to shoot a couple of nails now. Complement the screws. And I'll also put some in here in the middle of the drywall, kind of like on an angle. Okay, I'll do the same here and along the board. And I'll continue to do that for the length of the board. So I've shot the remaining nails in. I'm going to now fill in the nail holes and the screw holes with some wood filler now that I'm here, so I don't have to come back. And also dap along the top where my finger is here. I'm just going to put some dap just to close that gap. I'm just showing you the wood filler I'm using. I'm using 2 different types. They're all from Elmer's. This is a Pro Bond Max, and this is just your standard wood filler. The one on the right's a lot cheaper. I'm also using the one in the form of a tube. Just a little easier to squeeze into the nail holes and what have you. I bought the other ones to fill the bigger gaps between the paneling. I'm going to lightly sand just to make sure it's smooth before I apply the wood filler. I'm just going to be using this 150 grit sandpaper to sand the nail and screw holes. You could use a little orbiter sander to sand these, make it quicker, but I'm trying to minimize dust since I don't want dust going all over the house, and I don't want to seal off the rooms with plastic. So just light sanding, enough to get it to be smooth, and then I can apply the wood filler. Now that I've got the holes filled, I'm going to apply the caulking on the top. There's different ways of putting that putty on. You can either use a putty knife, or you can just use your fingers and kind of push it into the hole. Whatever technique works for you, just use what's best and what you're most comfortable with. Just using this Alex Plus DAP. It says for Windows, but it's paintable, dries fast, and works great. So I've got my caulking tube and my caulking gun. I'm just going to run a little bead of caulking along the top. You don't need to put a lot, just put very minimal. I'm going to wet my finger and just kind of clean it up nicely. So pretty much going to run that bead of caulking all the way across. So the first piece is mounted. Screw holes and nail holes have been filled with some wood filler, paintable wood filler. And I've caulked between the ceiling and the board. And once the wood filler dries, I'll sand it lightly. If it's shrunk or there's still a bit of a bump or a void, I'll fill it up again a second time. So pretty much, normally what I would do is I would install all the molding, and then go back and do all the wood filler, and then do the caulking. But I just want to demonstrate to you the process in terms of finishing a board. Just recording my progress here. So I've got the boards along the slanted part of the ceiling and the flat part. So I've got those installed. As I indicated, where the big round things are there, that's where I actually screwed into the roof trusses. And I've also shot some 2-inch nails. Obviously I glued it, caulked between the top of the ceiling and the board, and also caulked a little gap in between the two boards, as it's never perfect. I've already sanded the wood filler for the nails once, and I've reapplied some additional wood filler just on the screws as it needed some more. So I'll go back and sand that. I'm using about 100 grit when I sand. Those are my joints where the two boards butt up against each other. Starting to take some shape now. I filled in the nail and screw holes, sanded, primed, and caulked. So it's not looking too bad, considering it's just got a coating of primer on it. Just started putting in the vertical strips. Got 2 strips in there. And I'm just going to continue putting the bottom in, and then put the additional strips in. At the end, when I'm done, unlike my living room where I don't think I had as much space between the last pot light and the wall, and so it didn't look too bad. So what I might do here, I'll give it a try, see if I can get an extra strip in and see what it looks like. Just showing the progress with the bottom strips installed and as well as the vertical strips. So as you can see, I just have the holes filled with the wood filler. I'm going to sand them, then prime them. What I'm going to do is, because there's such a big gap between the wall and the last pot light, I'm going to put another vertical strip on this side so it's evenly spaced, and I'll do the same on this side as well. Just a couple of pointers when nailing, especially if you're not going into a stud. What you want to do is just angle your nailer kind of upwards at a 45, just to kind of shoot into the drywall. And what I do is I put nails every 6 inches. On this particular vertical strip, I'm actually right where the stud is on the left hand side. So I know any nails I put there will go into a stud. But if there was no stud, just keep your gun angled. As you can see here, it's angled. And I shoot into it. Okay, I'm going to continue nailing. I do want to point out that if there is a bit of a ridge here, you can use a sander. I have an orbital sander that just gets that nice and even. Fill it in with some wood filler, prevent it from cracking. And if need be, just use a little bit of drywall mud to get that final smooth finish. So I completed putting the molding on the slanted part of the ceiling. As I indicated, that I was going to put the additional 2 strips on the ends just to even out. Doesn't look too bad. I don't want to overdress it. Just wanted to mention that I filled the gap between the vertical pieces and horizontal pieces with some wood filler. That way it won't crack. And afterwards, what I've done, I'll show you what I've done at the bottom here. After I sanded the wood filler, I just took a little smooth coating of drywall mud and just applied it. That just makes it nice and smooth, and you can't see the joint. Over here, you can see I took my orbital sander and sanded it down very nicely so it's quite smooth between the horizontal and vertical piece. And if need be, I will apply a little very thin coating of drywall mud there as well. So just a couple of things to make it look good. At the end of the day, from far away, you won't be able to tell whether it's smooth or whether there's a little step. But that's just me, just trying to do things while I'm there, just to make sure that it looks good. This is the orbital sander that I'm referring to. And it takes 5-inch round discs. And I'm using number 60 grit. That helps with sanding off the wood filler, which gets quite hard. For the drywall mud, I'm just using a 150 grit sandpaper. I just bought it in a roll. I cut small pieces, and I just do it by hand. So that's what it is. Oh, I had it right side up the first time. So there you go. It's a 150 grit, and that just gives it a nice smooth finish. Ready for priming. Just finished priming. So this is what it looks like just before I'm gonna paint it. So for the ceiling paint, I'm using the Sherwin-Williams Eminence High Performance Ceiling Paint. Goes on pretty good, and it seems to do a good job of covering and hiding roll lines. I've just completed the first coat of the ceiling paint, and looks pretty good. I'm using a Sherwin-Williams Eminence paint. Hides the imperfections quite nicely. I'll determine once it's dry if I need a second coat. If not, I'll just leave it. I did remove the pot lights, they're hanging there, just so I can get around them nicely with a roller. Just continue with the rest of the ceiling. These pieces I did not pre-prime. As you can see, there's a gap between the boards. I actually had to shim some of the boards to reduce that gap, just because as I mentioned before, the ceiling's not 100% straight. So once I put some wood filler, put some smoothing it out and sand it, it should look like this side, which from far away doesn't look too bad. Once the top piece is painted, everything will look the same. The flat paint definitely will hide a lot of the imperfections. And I'll continue to shoot as I make more progress. I just completed the top portion of the ceiling, and I have started to fill the holes with the wood filler. As you can see, there was a gap between the two pieces where the slanted part of the ceiling meets the flat part, and I filled that with wood filler. I just don't want that cracking. So once I sand it nicely, I might apply a little bit of drywall mud just to get it smooth 100%, as best as I can, I guess. And then I'll prime it and paint it along with the ceiling. And then I'll just finish off the last part, which is the last slanted part of the ceiling. I've just completed the last part of the ceiling. Some of the boards are already pre-primed from the previous boards that I'd cut for the other side. As you can see, I started sanding the holes, and I applied a little bit of mud just to give it a nice smooth finish. Gotta sand it still. And once I'm all done, I'll just show the final product. So I just finished priming the remaining pieces on the ceiling that I had installed. So as you can see, there's a bit of a gap between the board and the ceiling, and I'll just be using some latex caulk to fill that in. And there's some on this side as well. So wherever there's a gap, actually I do run a bead of caulk all along the end of it. Anywhere where the board meets the ceiling, I'll be running a bead of caulk just to fill any gaps that might exist. So I finished doing the caulking, and I put my first coat of paint. It's not looking too bad, but it definitely needs a second coat. You may not see it in the camera, but when you look at the other side that I did apply 2 coats to, this side here, the top part and this side definitely need another coat. It's coming along quite nicely. This is the completed ceiling. I'm filming from the ground up. That's the high flat part. To the right is the slanted part. I have yet to paint the walls, so don't focus on that. And there's the left side. Here's another view of the finished product. I want to thank you guys for watching this video. Hopefully it'll inspire you to do your own DIY project around your house. I highly suggest that you take the necessary safety precautions to make sure you're doing everything in a safe manner and you don't get hurt. I personally did have an accident while working on this, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in my next video. Until then, thanks for joining me.